All right, guys, I am going to walk you through the answers to each of the worksheets that you've done this week. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the summative assessment coming up on Tuesday. I'm also going to hold a review at 9:30 that I sent you in assignments. So I recommend stopping into that because it's going to give you a better sense of what exactly you should know from each of these. It won't be long. But let's start with the web quest, the respiratory web quest. The most important part of this is the labeling. So check yours against this if you want to pause this video quickly to make sure you have these things labeled correctly. A is referring to the upper respiratory system. So if you have an upper respiratory infection, it's usually in the trachea, throat, nose. So this is upper respiratory. B specifically is pointing to the larynx, which is the voice box. C is pointing to the epiglottis. So just above the voice box, there's a little flap that closes over your airway to prevent food from going down when you swallow. So that's called the epiglottis right there. D is the trachea. E is the diaphragm. So that's the muscle that assists in expanding the lung cavity when you breathe. F over here is pointing to the right primary bronchi. So remember, this is the right lung, this is the left lung. So trachea branches into the bronchi. So this is the right primary bronchi. G is the left primary bronchi. H refers to the secondary bronchi on both sides. So that's when these bronchi tubes get a little bit smaller. I, over here, is the right superior lobe. J is the right medial lobe. K is the right inferior lobe. So there are 3 lobes on the right side of a human lung. L is the left superior lobe. M is the left inferior lobe, so there are only 2 on the left-hand side. And N, this little spot on the left, is the cardiac notch. So you know how if you put your hand over your heart, you usually put it on the left side? That's because while it's in the middle, this is the part that pumps the blood to the rest of the body. So it's larger and it needs more space. So the cardiac notch takes up a little bit of the space of the left lung there. All right, so make sure you know how to label these. The diagram won't be exactly the same, but this should be helpful. Bronchioles are the very end of the branched bronchi, like the twigs on a tree. So they're at the very end here, these little twigs. Alveoli are the tiny air sacs at the end of the bronchi. And they are the area where gas exchange happens. So you should be familiar with this at this point in the game. You've done a lot on the respiratory system. This is where oxygen goes into the bloodstream and carbon dioxide leaves the bloodstream. The respiratory and lymphatic systems are connected because the lymphatic vessels are intertwined throughout the lungs. Their job is basically to carry pathogens, possibly cancerous cells, away from the lungs. They enter the lymph, which is a fluid. It's similar to the blood, but it's part of the immune system. And the lymph basically carries out these pathogens and then filters them through lymph nodes, which is why if you get sick, your lymph nodes get swollen. They're basically filtering out pathogens that are making you sick. Okay. The concentration gradients that they talked about in the Edpuzzle video and here are pretty important. So we'll talk more about that in the Zoom today, but how does the concentration gradient aid in the diffusion of gases? Everything travels naturally from a high concentration to a low concentration, whether it's fluid or gases or particles or whatever. So oxygen diffuses across the membrane from a high concentration to a low concentration. So if you imagine the lungs as a high, when you inhale as a high concentration of oxygen, and the blood coming from the heart to the lungs has a low concentration of oxygen. The oxygen will flow from that high concentration inside the lungs to the low concentration in the blood. All right, so that's the concentration gradient. And then that blood is also carrying high concentrations of carbon dioxide, which will diffuse into low concentrations of carbon dioxide inside the lungs. So that concentration gradient really aids in the diffusion of gases. And then these 5 right here are going to be important for your summative assessment, the 5 important features of the alveoli. Alveoli has a large surface area, so there's a lot of area for gas exchange to happen. This makes the gas exchange more efficient. They're very thin, so the gases, the oxygen and carbon dioxide, can diffuse very easily through the membrane. In addition, the capillaries that go past the alveoli only allow one cell to pass through at a time. So each blood cell that passes the alveoli is able to do that gas exchange with the very thin lining of the alveoli. It's also moist, which just helps the gases dissolve and diffuse through the lining. Like I said, there's a good supply of blood, so each alveoli has a capillary network that surrounds it, which I'll show you in another slide, but it just allows that gas exchange to happen again. And it's very well ventilated. So obviously when you inhale, there's a lot of air supply that goes right to the alveoli, full of oxygen that allows it to transfer to the blood. Okay, so that was the respiratory WebQuest. Let's do the physiology lab next. Okay, so the Edpuzzle, if you didn't pay close attention to it, make sure you go back and watch it again. Make sure you look at the answers. I think it gave you the answers. If it didn't, somebody please send me a message, because I'll post another video going over the answers of the Edpuzzle. I actually might do that anyway, so that you can study that for the summative assessment, because on the summative you're going to be asked these following prompts, and you'll need to be able to explain them sort of in your own words. So you need to make sure you understand what he's actually talking about in these 3 prompts. So maybe I'll post another video about those. Then on the summative, you'll have to do something similar to this. This hopefully was pretty easy. I think I explained this in my last video, so I'll go through it quickly, but the vital capacity, you would just add the tidal volume, expiratory reserve volume, and inspiratory reserve volume together to get 2490 milliliters. Residual volume, again, it explains how to do it here. You should get 900 milliliters. Total lung capacity, 3390 milliliters. So if you didn't get those, go back and redo these calculations here. It sort of explains how to do them. The average is shown right here. So our numbers here were well below the average. Possible diagnosis or reasoning, if you look back up at the scenario, tells you that she has experience or history of smoking. She doesn't have high levels of fitness. She has high BMI. And based on these symptoms, she might be experiencing early signs of emphysema, which we talk about a little bit up here too. And then what does a spirometer measure? It's a tool that measures lung function and volume and capacity of the lungs. And then the five factors that can affect lung capacity and volume in an individual. Sex, age, body type. So basically your body makeup, your fitness level, disease, so that would be like emphysema or infection of some sort, environmental factors like smoking or working in a factory with chemicals, that sort of thing, and lifestyle choices, again, like smoking or how much you exercise, etc. So hopefully that was pretty easy. And then the last one I want to review is quickly, I'm not going to go over the answers to the respiratory distress lab because you should have just submitted it. But in the summative assessment, you'll have to talk a little bit about the different types of respiratory distress. This question's pretty easy. You basically just have to read over this top part and analyze it and give me one answer for this part of the lab. So we won't go over this because I'm sure there are some people who haven't turned it in yet. So hopefully that was helpful, and I will post another video explaining a little bit about the Edpuzzle, and then I'll hold a Zoom at 9:30, sort of reviewing any questions you have, and I will talk about the Edpuzzle on that Zoom too. So please come to that. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you guys next week.